In the Lyman direction, soldiers of the 66th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces repelled another Russian attack. A group of 5 assault troops on motorcycles tried to break through to Kharkivka. However, their advance was stopped by engineering barriers, after which the enemy was forced to fight off both Ukrainian infantry and drones at the same time. As stated by the 66th Brigade itself, the Russian motorcycle assault troops were completely eliminated. Drone operators from the Black Raven unit struck at the occupiers' artillery. With an FPV drone strike, they destroyed a Grad multiple launch rocket system along with its full ammunition load. As a result of its detonation after the drone attack, the system was completely destroyed. Since the beginning of the day in the Donetsk direction, Russian occupiers have assaulted the defense forces' positions in the areas of Shcherbanovka, Yekaterinovka, Poltavka, Rozanov Yar, and towards Pleshchevka. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian army attempted to push back the Ukrainian armed forces in the areas of Vladimirovka, Shikovo, Rodinskoy, Novoekonomicheskoy, Zvarivo, Kedlino, and Udaknoy. In the Novopavlovsk direction, the enemy tried to attack in the areas of Fili, Ivanovka, Alexandrograd, Malievka, and Novoivanovka.
The fact remains, the defense north of Pokrovsk by our forces is active, even proactive, I would say. This gives hope, because the Pokrovsk direction remains key for the fighting north of Pokrovsk. That includes Konstantinovka, Drushkino, and Kramatorsk. From the north, it's clear that the Russian Lyman group is advancing towards Sloviansk, trying to break through. Well, the battle for Donbass, it remains in an active phase. There's no talk of a lull.
And in the Kupiansk direction, drones from the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service's Phoenix UAV unit are successfully destroying shelters where Russian army soldiers are desperately trying to hold their positions. In addition to bunkers and ruins where the enemy tried to concentrate their forces using UAVs, the operators destroyed electrical equipment, a heavy drone bomber, and shot down a Russian reconnaissance Mavic in flight. There as well, in the Kupiansk direction, Russian artillery suffered significant losses. Operators from the Sapsan UAV battalion detected and destroyed a 2S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled artillery unit, as well as a D-30 howitzer belonging to the Russian invaders. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force demonstrated how Russian Shahids and Garants are destroyed using a machine gun mounted on a Mi-8 helicopter. During one of the nighttime attacks on Ukraine, a machine gunner shot down 6 Shahid-type drones and 4 Garand UAVs. It is worth noting that to counter Russian attack drones, the Ukrainian air defense also actively uses interceptor drones. And closer to the front line, other types of drones are used to destroy Russian UAVs, namely high-speed FPV drones. For example, in one sector, 2 of these drones simultaneously spotted a Russian Lancet attack drone in the air. As a result, one of them hit the enemy target, while the other recorded the successful mission on video. Russia lost another 910 servicemen in the war against Ukraine over the past day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army have exceeded 1,096,000 people. In addition, over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 5 armored combat vehicles, 26 artillery systems, 2 multiple rocket launchers, as well as 72 units of enemy automotive equipment.
He is the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army. Serhiy, we're glad to have you with us. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Greetings, colleagues.
Let's get straight to the quote from Mr. Fedor Vyacheslavsky. In one of his interviews, he said that, in fact, Russia's war against Ukraine is reaching a deadlock, where neither side can achieve success, either in capturing territory nor in deoccupation. There are only some pinpoint victories by Ukraine's defense forces. I'll say right away, that's not a direct quote. I just summarized the general context. Serhiy, as a military man, does the situation really look like that right now? Let's even start with the Pokrovsk direction, where in the past day a record was set for the number of attacks in one direction by the occupiers.
Well, I think it's important to say that, first of all, I rely on the statements and opinions of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as well as our commanders in various directions. And of course, I also know the situation directly on the front lines in certain areas. As for the statements made by certain political figures or officials, let's treat their opinions specifically as statements from political representatives. Regarding the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, it's clear that the enemy, having failed to achieve any strategic objectives during the so-called major summer offensive. We can't say today, I'm far from making such a claim, that the Russian major summer offensive has completely failed there. The fact that they failed to achieve their objectives is, above all, thanks to the defense forces, who managed to organize both a mobile defense and, accordingly, carry out counterattacks against the Russian armed forces. In my opinion, even though they have more manpower and, say, their air component is more powerful than ours, nevertheless, they fail to gain any advantage or achieve a single objective. Moreover, if we talk about losses, you already mentioned today the losses of the Russian army. It's important to emphasize that in August these losses began to increase. And if we look at the absolute numbers, say, per square meter, the Russian army started losing more than 100 Russian servicemen, which hasn't happened for quite a while, because Russia had stopped, let's say, advancing in columns. But in September of this year, and we're only halfway through the month, these numbers are changing and increasing even further. So, the Russians have started taking heavier losses, again, without really changing their tactics, still moving in infantry assault groups. That's why Pokrovsk today was clearly the #1 target for the Russians during this offensive. Accordingly, today the goal has not been achieved, just as, well overall, we should probably talk about the Pokrovsk-Myrnihrad agglomeration, which has slowed the enemy's advance. Let me remind you that it's mainly the 51st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation fighting here, reinforced by a large number of units, including those that have already arrived from the Sumy region. Then they were redeployed to Zaporizhia, but they didn't stay there long because it was urgently necessary to provide support, and today they're trying to do just that. The units that managed to pull off, well, this flash mob in Dobrapilya, this little bunny, which today has been left without its ears. One ear has been completely eliminated, and the other has been cut off. And today we can see that in the area of the neck of this bunny, the defense forces recently liberated one of the settlements, which speaks to the targeted work of Ukrainian assault troops. Here, among other things, I would refer to the opinion of our military personnel. Accordingly, we are speaking with the chief assault trooper of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is the hero of Ukraine, Valentin Manko. He constantly reports on the situation and what is happening. He prioritizes full cooperation between the assault units of our armed forces and other units operating in the area of responsibility of the 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine. I'll say it with pride, Azov. And, accordingly, to put it briefly, the operation is ongoing. And I can only add one thing, God willing, may our people succeed in everything they've planned. That's why the enemy isn't giving up on offensive actions toward Dobrapilya, even though things aren't going so well for them there. The enemy isn't abandoning their advance on Pokrovsk either, and it's clear they've concentrated more than 110,000 personnel there. They'll try to attack. Moreover, probably not in the same way as a few months ago with those flanking maneuvers. You remember, we've talked about at least 3 directions. An attempt to bypass, encircle Pokrovsk, Myrnihrad, Koshchetinika, and basically get into the rear and occupy these cities. I think that since the enemy hasn't achieved their goal, today they will likely try, first of all, to use their mechanized component, and possibly even launch a frontal assault. Let's not forget that the Novopavlivka direction of the front is nearby. This is also one of the elements of the Russian Pokrovsk offensive, as is the entire Donetsk front and the whole Donetsk region. Unfortunately, the Russians have made some tactical gains there, but on the other hand, they are running into the area between the rivers, the Volkhya and the Voronezh. So, as they try to move in there, it's quite likely they'll run into some serious problems of their own making. And then, ellipsis, once again, hoping that our forces succeed. But the fighting is brutal, and the enemy is pulling in as many reserves as possible. As I already mentioned, these are Marines, these are Russian paratroopers. And by the way, I can't help but mention that today, during the Zapad 2020-2025 exercises, Russian paratroopers were doing jumps, parachuting from airplanes. This is something that was used back in the Cold War years. Although, for example, The Soviet Army never actually carried out such parachute operations during the Cold War. So today, Russian paratroopers, the Russian airborne forces, are fighting in Ukraine just like regular infantry. All that's left of the airborne forces is the name, the striped shirts, and, well, the black body bags. That's all we can really say about it. And this is the Pokrovsk direction, which is extremely difficult. But honestly, all the frontline directions are really tough right now. They're all interconnected. The enemy is trying to attack everywhere.
Yes, that's true. And let's also focus on some of the successes of the Ukrainian army. Here's another recent update. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has confirmed the successful strike on Russian army command posts in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region. These strikes were carried out on September 8th by missile forces, as well as aviation and drone systems, targeting the command posts of a center group of the 41st Army of the Russian Federation, which operates specifically in the Pokrovsk direction. As a result, personnel were eliminated, including members of the command staff. Previously, these positions had also been visited by the Russian Defense Minister, Andrei Bolosov. The strikes disrupted the command of the Russian troops and also weakened their combat capability. Sergei, what do you think? Overall, the Russian army has major problems, basically with discipline and motivation. We talk about this regularly on our program. And these kinds of successful strikes, specifically on command posts, that's yet another huge factor in the ongoing destabilization of the Russian army. And please explain to us, from a military perspective, how this complex mechanism interacts, right? It's like a domino effect. When one piece starts to fall somewhere, everything else, the whole picture, can even collapse.
Let's hope for that. But for now, we're not rushing to any conclusions. The only thing I can say is that the so-called Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Bolosov, just got lucky. He was literally just a few hours away from being hit by that strike. Well, maybe next time he'll get even luckier. So, when it comes to troop command and control, it's clear that these strikes weren't random in this particular direction. First of all, Donetsk, well, that's really where the headquarters and command posts of those armies, those units and formations that are actually fighting in the Pokrovsk direction are gathered. Accordingly, we understand that if you cut off the head of this army, it takes time to appoint people to those positions, even if it's just temporary acting commanders, right? So, in any case, the chain of command is disrupted. A certain link is lost. After all, if you cut off the head, you have to move someone up. So it turns out that between the links, from junior commanders up to the top, you have to pull someone out to fill the gap. So it's not just about losing a platoon commander on the battlefield, although having a good platoon commander is a huge advantage for a unit if they have such a platoon or company commander. So, accordingly, it's not just that control is lost. Control actually stops altogether. And so, well, I wouldn't say that the units act like blind kittens, but in any case, the whole idea behind what's happening gets lost. That's the most important thing. And the people who are managing the situation at the highest level, they see the whole picture on the battlefield. So when someone comes up from a lower level, they're operating with completely different facts, a different view of the battlefield. Well, for example, for a soldier, it's a trench. For a company strongpoint, it's the company commander. And then moving up, there's the battalion, the regiment, I don't know, the brigade, right? So it's clear that this already has a negative impact on how the units operate. Just a negative impact, plain and simple. And on top of that, you also lose logistics and communications. By the way, when we talked about our setbacks on the front in Donetsk region, say, in 2023 and partly in 2024, we mentioned that sometimes, or rather, most often, our units were let down by a lack of communication between adjacent units. That's one of the reasons why the armed forces of Ukraine, among others, had to switch to a core system. Reality forced it. Fighting this way is much more effective. And by the way, we can see this today, for example, in Dobrapilya.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.